I just want to say thank you for joining us today and welcome. This is our latest installment in our series, Perspective School Bus Fleet Electrification. So it's really exciting to have our new member, Sawatch Labs, here today to talk to you about optimizing electrification and EV infrastructure for public school fleets. So thank you again for being here. I'm going to let David and Mary take it away and introduce themselves and jump right into the presentation. After they finish up, we will have time for questions and answers. So if you've got questions along the way and you want to make sure we get to them, go ahead and drop them in the chat. My colleague Michelle, who's on the line with us as well, will be taking a look at that throughout. So thank you again for joining us and take it away, Mary and David. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you, Michelle, for having us today. Thanks to all the attendees taking time out of your day to join us. So as Jessica mentioned, topic of today's webinar is optimizing electrification and EV infrastructure for public school fleets. So my name is David Fuchs. I'm with Sawatch Labs. We're a fleet electrification analytics company. Today, we're going to cover a little bit about what we do in the space and our approach, as well as dive into a case study that we recently did with Denver Public Schools. With me today is Mary Till, who's going to be covering that case study. So I'll just have Mary briefly introduce herself as well.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, perhaps for some of you. Thanks for having us. Happy to be here and looking forward to covering the case study for Denver Public Schools, just as an example of how data can really help inform your electrification. I've been working with fleets for the last 15 years or so, specifically with data, telematics data, and operational data that can be used to increase safety, reduce emissions, electrify intelligently, and more. So happy to share our objective findings on the study that we conducted for a school system. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary. And my background is similarly in telematics. So I was previously with a company called Geotab before joining Sawatch. Again, background is in telematics and how to use that data to deliver insights to fleets. So with that, we'll jump right into it. As Jessica mentioned, feel free to throw your questions in the chat or hold on to them at the end. We'll save some time for questions at the end. Alrighty, so just a bit of background on Sawatch Labs and where we came from. Company was founded in 2017, basically on the idea that telemetry and GPS data from fleets can be used to deliver insights around electric vehicles. So our background is really in what we call fleet electrification analysis, which is understanding how electric vehicles may operate in a fleet and delivering insights into vehicle recommendations and infrastructure around those vehicles. We also have a robust emissions reporting software that allows fleets to establish a baseline for generated emissions and then watch how those emissions can be reduced over time through the introduction of zero emission vehicles. We're proud to say that in May of last year, we were acquired by WEX. So those in the fleet industry probably know WEX as a fuel card company. We're very excited to join that and be part of their EV solution set that we'll talk about on the next slide. So in addition to Mary and I's background in telematics, our team, a small but mighty team, has a background in not only telematics and other operational vehicle data, but understanding vehicle duty cycles and how vehicles can be bucketed in those different categories, but also energy modeling, which is really the crux of what we're doing. And what energy modeling is in this context is understanding what daily energy needs of EVs may be and how that can impact operations in the future. So that's really the crux of what we're doing, and I'll talk a bit about that in the next few slides. We have been a neutral objective advisor to over 200 fleets across the country, as well as in Europe. These are fleets both in the public and private sector of varying shapes and sizes. So in the public sector alone, we've worked with numerous municipalities, counties, state level fleets, really run the gamut on scope and size, in addition to university fleets and other public school districts. So through that, we've analyzed a lot of data, as you can see here. We've looked at a lot of trips, which has allowed us to learn more over time as we take in this data. So I mentioned we're part of a broader WEX EV solution set. So really at Sawatch Labs, we're that first step in what we call an electrification journey. And or electrification guidance is probably another better term that we like to use. But what electrification guidance allows fleet operators to do when it comes to implementing EVs is enabling you to plan your transition effectively and pick the vehicles that are most suitable to be replaced with EVs. Understand what that total cost of ownership will look like in those potential replacement vehicles and compare them to what you would normally procure for a fleet. Get recommendations on level, location of chargers and how that will affect the infrastructure project that you take underway. And then finally, get a good understanding of what potential carbon emission savings are. Once you have that analysis done, we have a number of solutions at WEX that allow you to help with organization and payment of charging sessions. So similar to how many fleets are running WEX fuel cards today, as fleets transition to more EVs within a fleet, there need to be options for public charging payments, which they have today with RFID and driver applications, but also at-home reimbursement solutions. So maybe not always relevant to certain fleets, but sometimes vehicles are taken home and a driver needs to be reimbursed for those charging sessions. We have a platform in order to do that. And then finally, depot charging. So organizing and understanding which vehicles are charging at which charger, even within a specific area. A very good example of this would be like a university fleet where different departments are charging at different locations and you need to organize that. Similar to how we fit within the WEX EV solution set, we also see Sawatch Labs Analytics as fitting sort of, it's a very important cog in the overall electrification journey that has a number of different stakeholders, both internal and external to a fleet and a fleet operator, many of which maybe have not come into play in the past. So the way we look at it, right, is we are taking in vehicle operational data into our analysis, and that can influence a number of different things, such as the particular OEM, a fleet operator, a fleet manager may work with, and the decisions around which vehicles to procure. Similarly, our analysis will have heavy impacts on the particular level of charging hardware a fleet may acquire or procure, in addition to the charge management software that may sit upon that hardware. And then finally, our outputs can and do heavily influence how an engineering project may go forward and the design associated with that, but also the conversations that are to be had with the utility provider to better understand what options exist with that site, but having a very detailed plan on the power that's required at those locations. This again just highlights the different ways in which we work with our customers. So as mentioned, well, Mary will actually talk a little bit about our partnership with Xcel Energy, which is a utility in Colorado, Minnesota, Wisconsin that ran a fleet electrification advisory program. In addition to that, we work with the likes of Kimley Horn to put together infrastructure projects. A good example that we have a case study on is with Salt Lake City. So that we're able to partner up with these organizations in order to deliver analysis to the end customer. Geotab has been a long time and trusted partner of ours, not only as a partner, but we do resell that solution as well in order to help bolster our studies and collect data for those analyses. And then very similarly, since we've joined the WEX company, we're able to use WEX fuel transaction data in order to run these analyses as well. While we have a number of great partnerships, informal and formal, we also do work directly with our end customers as well. So Mary will talk about the work that we did directly with Denver Public Schools, but today we are also working with Colorado State Fleet Management. So really the idea being here that we're open to working with customers in many different ways, And we recognize that partnerships are very key, such as the one that we have with the Texas Electric School Bus Project. Finally, what are the benefits of an objective analysis? First and foremost, it's really understanding the value that electrification can have within a fleet and helping a fleet operator plan their transition to a mixed energy school bus fleet. So we use the term mixed energy, knowing that a fleet is not transitioning to 100% electric vehicles overnight. The reality of the situation is that for a very long time, fleets are going to be running on what we call mixed energy. So how do you manage running a fleet that has electric vehicles, potentially plug-in hybrid, electric vehicles, ICE vehicles, diesel, possibly propane, all these different energies that are powering your fleet needs to be managed and planned in a very detailed and a clear manner. Building on that, right, is creating a realistic and data-driven plan, a plan that is built upon analysis and objective guidance and data, so that you can reach any potential sustainability goals and mandates that you have, but doing so without sacrificing operational efficiencies. And then finally, the goal of all this, right, is to optimize vehicle procurement and how those vehicles will potentially be charged. So I'll talk a little bit about answering the question on when, where, and how long those vehicles will potentially need to charge. We wanted to show this to, again, kind of hammer home the core of what we're doing in the analysis when it comes to vehicle recommendation. And this is really answering the question, what would you do if you could predict actual range? So I think many folks know electric vehicles, small and large, come with an advertised range for that particular vehicle. Well, we know that there's a lot of factors that can potentially influence that range. So what we've done at Sawatch is when we look at a fleet, we look at a historical analysis of that fleet, and then we overlay the environmental factors that can influence how that vehicle would potentially operate in the real world. And those factors include things like temperature. So a school bus is going to use energy to both heat and cool down the cab for the passengers in the bus. Topography, so if a bus is going uphill, it's expending more energy. Conversely, it's going downhill, there's potential for regenerative braking. Driving behavior as it relates to speed, and if that bus is operating in an urban versus rural environment. Number of passengers obviously influences the load on that bus. And then also your predictable versus unpredictable routes. So school buses in general have very predictable routes from one day to another. But there are many times when it could go on a field trip, or it could be taking a football team to a game at night. Those are the types of activities that are not necessarily captured in average daily mileage, but they are captured when we run an analysis that looks at historical data for that fleet. And again, that really influences the energy requirements for that bus and eventually the range of that particular vehicle and how it will operate. This gets into a typical vehicle recommendation that we have. So we can spend a lot of time diving into the details of this, and we'd be very happy to provide an in-depth demo to anyone who would like it. But this is a screenshot of the software that we use to run our analysis. The beauty of running it through a software is that it's easy to scale based on the number of vehicles that you have. And our fleet operators, our customers have access to this data as well so that they can interact with it. But what we have here is a typical vehicle recommendation. So over to the right, you have some information around the existing vehicle and how much data we have on that. So again, what we're doing is we're taking existing vehicle data and trips, and then we're modeling what that would look like if it was replaced with an EV. So in this case, we are recommending this particular EV bus. And we do so using a simple scoring methodology so that you can make a decision on whether to go EV or to not go EV. We do this by looking at a number of factors, the first of which is economics, or TCO, total cost of ownership. Many of you probably are familiar with that term. And that's really understanding if those lower operational costs associated with an electric bus outweigh that higher upfront cost that comes with it. In this case, we're also able to include incentives and grants that are associated with that bus. This particular fleet chose to apply the EPA grant for this particular bus. And we see that the total cost of ownership is lower by a few $1,000s in that EV. The next piece that we look at is energy requirements of that vehicle. So getting back to that predicting range and energy modeling is we're trying to understand how much midday charging is required from this bus if it were replaced with an EV. In this case, we see it's approximately once a month. And we'll get into the details here in a second about how we arrive at that. The next piece is parking. So we can see here, we're trying to understand where and how long these buses are parking, or we use the term dwell or dwell time. So if we know that a vehicle is dwelling in the same location every evening, and we know it's for a sufficient amount of time, it makes it much easier to set an infrastructure for that particular vehicle. We also get a nice layout of where those potential parking locations are. Getting into a bit more into that energy usage that I talked about, we love this graph here because it's a great visual representation of how an EV runs and the energy required to operate that vehicle. So that orange line is what we call the effective usable battery capacity. So that's how much energy that bus would have if charged to a full charge. In the dark blue, we have our average daily kilowatt hours consumption. So basically the average energy that's required to power that vehicle. We can see it's well below that effective usable battery capacity, which is great. It means on average, this vehicle will be fine. But then that light blue shows us the max daily energy usage. And what that's saying is in each of these months, there's a day where there's a very big trip where that vehicle would need to stop to charge in the middle of the day. So again, this could be like that field trip or taking a school sports team somewhere. That may be very manageable for a fleet operator or fleet manager, but it's important to know that those outliers exist so that you can appropriately plan for it. And then also up here, we get some numbers around how many hours the vehicle would charge on average and the costs associated with that. So all this helps the fleet operator make a decision on if that EV is going to be a suitable fit as a replacement or not. And again, very happy to give a demo to anyone so that we can dive deeper into it. We then take those charging requirements for all those vehicles and we essentially aggregate them by site. So I asked this question earlier, which is where, when, and how long these vehicles would charge. So if you take all the vehicles at a site and you're understanding what each one of those vehicles charging requirements are, you can project out what the energy demand at those particular locations will be, along with the recommended number of infrastructure ports that you would potentially build at those sites. This also gives us the opportunity to identify if infrastructure can be shared amongst vehicles so that you don't overbuild. But we can also project out what future needs of the fleet will be as more and more vehicles become replaced with EVs, so that not only are you right sizing for today, but if you want to future proof for tomorrow, you can do that using this tool by projecting out what those energy demands will be. In the photos here, we have not only monthly demand peaks at facility locations, so basically how much energy may be required at that site at any given time, so that intelligent conversation can be had with facilities, but also your daily demand peaks, which indicates when these vehicles will potentially be charging and what times of the day you will be consuming potentially the most energy, so that you can make adjustments for that. And then in the middle here, just a very generic sort of look at where potential sites could be, depending on how large your school district is. So that's a breakdown of our infrastructure optimization tool. And again, we're happy to go more in depth for anyone that would be interested. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mary Till, who's going to dive into a case study on the project we ran with Denver Public Schools.
Thanks, David. Feel free to advance over to that first slide. So Sawatch Labs has worked with Xcel Energy for about the last 3 years, supporting what they call their FEEP program, which stands for Fleet Electrification Advisory Program. They were able to offer this at no cost to participating fleets in Colorado and some in Minnesota during that period of time. We also analyzed a few fleets in Wisconsin, but funding for the program and cost coverage came from variable sources. So we analyzed many fleets over that period of time, including several school fleets and their yellow fleet, as well as their white fleet. The goal here was really to help these organizations understand where the right applications for EVs were, which vehicles specifically to replace in the ideal vehicle candidate, but then also help them understand the charging infrastructure that they would need near term and long term to support their transition goals. We also included in this program the ability to observe electric vehicles after they're in operation. So how do you ensure that once EVs are added to the fleet that they are realizing their potential for savings by maximizing electric miles? So for Denver Public Schools, we actually did the EV suitability assessment and the infrastructure optimization that David went over high level. We also included that EV observation and found that their buses were being very well managed and maximizing electric miles during the period of the study. And we did some emissions calculations for them as well, as that rolled into their climate action plan and sort of demonstrated how to move forward. David, do you want to move ahead? Go ahead 2 slides for me, please. So we did ingest telematics data for Denver Public Schools on both their yellow and their white fleet. And we're looking at really helping them in both areas because that was part of their climate action plan. They also were really interested in data to help bolster applications they had made to EPA, to the state-sponsored Fleet Zero program, and then also take advantage of utility programs. So it wasn't just emissions goals that were important to them. You know, they have a fiduciary responsibility to use their funds responsibly, and they wanted to really find ways to maximize savings, but really importantly, limit disruption to their operation. All of these vehicles, whether in the yellow or white fleet, have important jobs of moving students or maintaining facilities, and it was important to them that they place vehicles in applications that make sense, and that they're also very strategic around where to place their infrastructure. That leads me to the next slide. So a little bit about the study before we get too far into findings. We did use telematics data set. That was a theme of the program. We would either tap into historic data or we would do future collection for fleets. For Denver Public Schools and their goals, we identified that how we could help them best was to really work with them for a year, for at least a year. So pulling in historic data, but also doing some future data collection, and then offering them an opportunity to meet with our subject matter experts, our data analysts on a monthly basis. So we can really review in depth with them, which vehicles made sense, answer questions about specific infrastructure siting, run scenario analysis, et cetera. And so a few weeks actually into the study, they realized how relevant having all this data was to them. And they actually requested even an extension to that 12-month period to continue working with us. What that allowed us to do was study not just one school year for them, but 2. And we did break them up into academic school years for some specific reasons, primarily because their routes had changed significantly between these 2 school years. So, that ongoing touch point, monthly touch point, future collection, we find so helpful for fleets that have ongoing operational changes like school fleets. We also find that generally the larger the fleet, the more desirable it is to maintain sort of day-to-day data collection for all the different decision points that you have throughout the year for budget planning, infrastructure planning. So that ongoing data collection was really valuable to them. The ability to pull in 12 months of historic data so they can make some quick decisions about electric buses that they were taking possession of near term and infrastructure needs, but then also being able to do future collection and really be thoughtful about where to place infrastructure long term and focus efforts was very helpful. So they had some data to get them started, and then they had ongoing collection to continue to make decisions with different factors, such as changes in fuel price, whether grants come through or not. So scenario analysis was huge for these individuals. We studied 212 white fleet, just a few more details there, David. 302 yellow fleet. And, we do see quite a bit of temperature variability in Denver. So having that long period of study allowed us to make sure we were factoring in those changes and those increased energy demands for those extreme temperatures. Thanks, David. So another thing to think about with this specific school system is that it covers a very large geographic area. So, these route lengths and types are all very different. No miles are necessarily the same. We had some rural areas and some urban areas, and they really cover a large footprint. This not only speaks to how energy demands can vary based on the types of miles that are being driven, but also that there's a lot of opportunities to place charging infrastructure based on where these buses would domicile, but where really should they focus their efforts? So having the data coming in and seeing all of that helped them really refine their decisions around all of that. This is a large school system. They have over 90,000 students in the school system. Of that, about 39,000 are eligible for public transportation or school transportation, but roughly about 20,000 students take advantage of that school transportation on a day-to-day basis. Thanks, David. So let's get to the good stuff, some results here. So out of all those vehicles that we studied, we found 89 vehicles that we felt through the analysis and through the localization that we did relevant to the school system made sense from an economic standpoint, but also an operational standpoint, which is really the key element that you get from this level of data granularity. Will these buses and vehicles be able to do their jobs business as usual with limited disruption or no disruption to your operations when it comes to charging and uptime? So 89 of those total vehicles did look like a good fit. Only 5 of those were in the yellow fleet, were buses. So that shouldn't really come as a surprise to any of you who have done this sort of suitability assessment. What's the reason for that? It was economics. So actually 250 buses would have worked operationally, have enough energy to get through the school day, have time to charge overnight or take advantage of midday charging in order to meet the needs of that bus. But the economics is where we have that trouble. So again, we went into some deep dive scenario analysis. Our analysts worked really closely with Denver Public Schools to understand what funding might be available to them on the vehicle side and what would the economics look like with and without funding. So in the ultimate scenario that Denver Public Schools chose, we had 89 total fits, 5 of those being buses, but again, 250 would actually meet the needs of drivers every day. So this really highlights the need for that upfront capital to really make EVs make economic sense in some of these situations. We do project out what the total cost of ownership reductions would be over the lifetime of the vehicles if the organization chooses to replace all 89. Now, all the individual vehicle data is there. So say they chose to replace 20 of those 89, we could back into what those total cost of ownership reductions would be. We also projected, some significant GHG reductions over the lifetime of those vehicles. Denver Public Schools, really took advantage of funding available to them. They were fortunate to not only have just federal funding, but some state funding and even some funding from Xcel Energy to offset the cost difference between an ICE and an EV vehicle. So that cost parity there was kind of made up, closed the gap a little bit with some of that funding. And so with their aggressive electrification goals, with this data, with them actively applying for the grants and incentives available to them, they were able to secure funding for 20 electric school buses. And they're in the process of receiving those and getting those launched now. So on the infrastructure side, diving into some of those results, the telematics and the dwell behavior of these buses identified offhand about 71 potential charging sites. After factoring in the EV replacement recommendations, we decreased that to 23 sites. So where those vehicles were dwelling that actually makes sense to go electric, we were able to narrow that down to 23 different sites where charging might make sense. So this right off the bat, right, streamlines sort of your near-term infrastructure investment, helps you focus on where do we place infrastructure where EVs make sense. They further eliminated projected charging sites based on vehicle fit. Working with the utility and with this information, they identified really one central hub that they wanted to focus their time and planning efforts on. So working through all that data, having regular meetings, discussing not only with our team, but with the utility about where it makes sense to get additional energy demand, help them land on that single central hub for charging in the near term. Again, DPS was fortunate to have several funding sources, and Xcel Energy was offering some incentives for their infrastructure, as well as from other sources. So they are planning to use that for their infrastructure build out if that has not already happened. Something else that they wanted to know about their infrastructure was, do we have opportunities based on this data to potentially use these buses as mobile batteries? Are there V2G or V2X opportunities, or what can we learn about potential resiliency when we're thinking about these electric buses? Also, insights that you get from the charging infrastructure projections that really help you understand where, when, how long vehicles are charging is, can we share chargers and optimize that way? Do we need managed charging? Or just, and can that be programmatic, or do we need someone to move those buses around in the lot? Again, some of the resiliency takeaways just to warm up. Nothing serious happening there as far as I can tell. So moving into EV SE optimization and final thoughts around this. I think one of the big takeaways here is that many times organizations will start with a 1-to-1 vehicle to infrastructure ratio. And when you're in heavy duty vehicles and vehicles like buses and people transport, 1-to-1 may make sense. That could be absolutely the logical thing to do. We have found in all of our studies, right, that 1-to-1 isn't always optimal. Sometimes you need it, but sometimes there's opportunities to share infrastructure. So we know high level that sharing infrastructure is possible and can reduce costs significantly in some cases. This slide is not related to Denver Public Schools. This is an example of light duty vehicles at a specific site and the infrastructure that would be needed to support them at a 50% electrification target. So this is just one example of a fleet using their estimated charging costs and their needs to support their vehicles. But you can see if we start with that 1-to-1 ratio at this specific site, at that 50% target for their light duty, we're looking at over $1 million spend for infrastructure in the ground to support those vehicles. Now, if we just look at the next bar here and think, well, if we look at vehicle activity, and let's say that if vehicles are only being used twice a week, let's assume that they can share charging infrastructure. Let's see how we can share that infrastructure and reduce those costs. And then if we look even more closely at what that daily battery usage is, and with this level of data, we can have those granular projections based on historical use of the vehicle, we can further reduce cost. And then finally, if we really look at the expected charging demand here for those vehicles and their time of use patterns, again, getting into telematics data to understand when do the vehicles return home to their home base, how long would they need to plug in and charge, and can we share those chargers? You can further optimize your infrastructure. So in this case, this ended up being about a 65% savings from that 1-to-1 ratio, all the way down to what we recommend through our infrastructure optimization tool. So very powerful. And, depending on, your organization and how conservative you might want to be with your charging plan. You have data to sort of bolster any number of chargers that you decide to have on site, but this helps you kind of slice and dice what those options might be based on your specific operations. So kind of summarizing final thoughts outside from just optimizing infrastructure, where you can see so much potential savings, is that, you know, school fleets really should not overlook their white fleet. Many times when we first have conversations with school systems, they are focused on buses. That's where there's a lot of motivation and where we see a lot of grants and incentives. But white fleet, you know, typically needs lower level charging. These are lower vehicle classes, so they're lower cost vehicles from trusted manufacturers. It can be a really great place to start, or to work concurrently as you electrify your yellow fleet. You know, one of the biggest things that I hear when we go through these analysis is that our data, you know, removes opinion. We can come in as that objective, neutral advisor that's so helpful for not only internal conversations, but external conversations. And then to have that data to use to submit for grants, incentives, et cetera, is very helpful. I can show operational fit. I can show what that cost difference is. And so your money will be well spent, because we know that these vehicles will work if you'll grant us that extra money to help with the capital expense difference. The more data you have, the better. So maybe you're not prepared for this kind of study today for a number of reasons, but something that you can do today is start collecting data. And really there's nothing better than that telematics data set, because we can really see clearly where those vehicles are, what kind of miles are being traveled. So start collecting it, retain it. You know, if you're able to retain history for 12 months, that can allow someone to come in and do a quick study, quick look back, and give you some great sort of ideas where to start immediately. This is just one fleet. We know that, you know, this is not representative of all school fleets. We have analyzed many school fleets, and certainly some of these themes we see throughout, but we must recognize that these buses operate in all kinds of different circumstances, different terrain, different temperature, different demands, different seasonality of operations. So this is only one fleet, and we recognize that. But hopefully there's something here that you can take away from this study that resonates with you. So thanks so much for sticking with us, and thanks to Denver Public Schools for allowing us to share this information with you today.
Thank you, Mary and David. That was absolutely amazing. It is really so important to see this information broken down like this. One of the things that we find ourselves saying all the time is it's so important to make a plan, and to have that plan be informed by real data. Then you go in armed with real information, which is so helpful. And I think so often in Texas, especially, it really comes down to the economics, like you mentioned. And this is a great way of showing exactly how that is going to shake out. So thank you so much. I want to take any questions that folks have. Please feel free to come on to camera and unmute yourself. So if anybody has any questions, please, we would love to answer them. Don't be shy. All right, Kevin. Are you able to, oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, it took me a sec.
Oh, no worries.
Well, thanks for the great presentation. I'm Kevin Moss. I'm with the Connecticut Green Bank, and we're currently in the process of designing and launching a electric school bus planning program. And we have a pretty constrained distribution here in Connecticut. So I just wanted to hear more about how you all handle doing like capacity studies at the potential locations and the school bus yards, and kind of how long that process tended to take, when you would start looking at new sites, just your overall kind of like process of doing that information gathering, and yeah, and essentially like how you made the determination whether to do an upgrade at an existing site or potentially look at a different one or, do a small deployment or things of that nature.
Would you like me to take that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so we work hand in hand with the utility and or engineering firms. So we're doing sort of the planning and projection based on what your vehicle needs would be. And we share that data with other providers that can come on site and conduct a site walk, understand what your current capacity is and help you understand what upgrades are needed. Where our data is most helpful is in optimizing what that is. So do you need something more dramatic on site, or can you work with the available power that you have to support your vehicles? By understanding what your energy needs are for each vehicle, that helps you answer that question. Our team does not have engineering services, so we don't go on site, but we coordinate with other stakeholders that do that. I should have shared also, when Denver Public Schools and when other organizations look at our site-specific recommendations, they oftentimes bring their energy data for their existing facilities demand. So you have that existing facilities load, right? And you're going to add this additional demand to it for your electric vehicles. What does that bigger picture look like? Oftentimes the organizations can kind of put some of that together on their own, but certainly you need to work with utilities. The utility may offer on-site services or not. You may need to work with an engineering firm to get those details. It's a great question. And, it just highlights that we're just one part in the electrification journey. I often share that I think what we do is like the beginning of a home improvement project. If I'm going to organize a space or redo a space, I measure that space, and I'm probably going to measure it 2 or 3 times because I'm going to buy materials and make cuts and make decisions based on that measurement. So we really focus on that measurement that then helps inform all of your other decisions.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, and I want to just highlight again, kind of one of the things that you said about being one piece of this puzzle. And I think that's such an important point to make, is that there are multiple stops on this roadmap to electrification, and we need different partners for each of those stops. And so it's really great to be able to see those silos sort of separated and how they all fit together. Thank you, Kevin, for the question. Anybody else? If not, I have some. Let's see, in the chat, what are the elements a school district should consider and provide to Sawatch for an estimated cost for your services?
So pretty simple. Usually it simply comes down to the number of vehicles that you want included in a study, and we can get there. I think it should be noted also our services are listed on the Sourcewell contract. So if that's a cooperative purchasing agreement that your school district can procure through, we can do that as well. And it's often a much simpler process, as I'm sure many of you know.
I'll add, we've analyzed 5 vehicles. We've analyzed tens of thousands of vehicles for a customer. So there's no project too big or too small. And we're really just looking at those number of vehicles and what value we can provide when it comes to our cost. So don't hesitate. Even if you want 2 vehicles analyzed, we have to start somewhere. So.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think that sometimes the smaller school districts feel like they don't need this kind of data as much. But I think it's great to point out that, we know school districts come in all kinds of sizes with all kinds of different numbers of buses. And this type of data is just as useful for the smaller fleets as it is for the bigger ones. So I'm glad that you made that point. Let's see. I know you kind of touched on this, but what is sort of the sweet spot of amount of data, like in terms of number of years? What would be the most ideal? What's the minimum, I guess? I'm just kind of curious about that.
So I would say in general, we would say a minimum amount of data would be 90 days, but I think with school bus fleets, ideally 12 months, right? So what
Yeah.
12 months allows us to do is not only capture temperature changes over the course of a school year, but you also want to take a look at what the summer looks like and how those buses are being utilized in the summer. And without capturing that summer data, you could miss out on a lot of ways that school bus is being used. So for school bus, ideally a year. We know a lot of school bus fleets run some element of telematics or GPS or ridership type solutions, and 99% of the time we can tap into that data.
Great. That's super helpful to understand. Let's see. Any other questions from the crowd before I ask all of my questions? One of the things that I think is so important about what you all offer, and I guess this isn't as much a question as sort of highlighting something that you said again about the money savings that you can get from having this investment in these kinds of services up front. I think that could you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. I think, one of my last slides where I was overviewing sort of how you can optimize infrastructure is really telling, because if you're able to reduce even, your charger count by one, you've more than offset the cost of our services. And if you think of it from the vehicle side, sort of a side benefit that we didn't get into during this presentation, but one that I think is worth noting relevant to this question, is that through the course of the study, you will also identify low utilization among vehicles. And fleet managers and operators are always looking to right size their fleet. And again, having data to help with those conversations about reducing vehicle count can be really helpful. So if you're able to identify a low utilization vehicle, remove that from your fleet, that's a vehicle you no longer need to replace, and you may already have that budgeted. You no longer need to maintain that vehicle. Those funds could be used to help offset the cost of your electric vehicle that you might bring in. So we see cost savings just in making one or two right decisions as an outcome of our services. You reach cost parity. And there's nothing more valuable, again, than that sort of objective advisor that's really looking at your data with no stake, right? So we're not looking to sell you chargers at the end of the study or charge management services or anything additional. What's in it for us is knowing that you're making the right decisions around electrification and you're set up for success. So it's really important to us that we hone those economics as much as we can. We work with each fleet to do, what you would expect of an economic analysis, right? What's your vehicle acquisition costs for both your ICE vehicles and your EVs, so we can get a comparison? What's your fuel cost, your kilowatt hour cost? Do you have time rates in your area? So we want to hone in on the economics as much as we possibly can and demonstrate how just making one right move or avoiding one bad move, is going to save you money in the long run and headache.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that's such an important piece of this. And, it really does come down to economics in terms of the decision that's being made for these school districts. And so, one of my favorite comments from a transportation director in Texas was, I might not have gone into looking into electric school buses really wanting them, but after learning more about the economics, I realized that we need them, and then comparing the cost per mile of running a diesel bus to the cost per mile of running an electric bus. And, you see the heads in the room starting to shake, like, okay, I'm starting to understand now what we're talking about. And that's, of course, even going beyond the other health benefits that are also a part of this conversation. So I think that it's very nice to be able to show the bottom line like this. It's a extremely useful tool for convincing people that this is a viable option moving forward. Any other last minute questions or anything else that y'all want to add before we wrap up?
I think we're good. Like I said, feel free to reach out if you are interested in a deeper discussion. Looks like Kevin does have another one here.
Yeah.
Staging. Can you discuss any staging approaches that Denver Public Schools took?
Yeah, and sorry, jumping in on Mike. What I meant there was just like if there were any situations where, because kind of related to my previous question, just because of like the local electric infrastructure, if you like got like 5 buses in at one site and then over time we're able to like integrate more buses at that site. I think we've seen a couple examples where folks have gotten an award for a number of a scale of buses that does not match the electric infrastructure, and then they're surprised when the upgrades take a really long time and are really costly. So trying to avoid that uncertain outcome.
Yeah, I think it's still a challenge. And I think you sort of gave some context around why that is a challenge. So one of the things that I witnessed with one school fleet was there were some infrastructure grants available to them, but it was only sort of for near-term infrastructure, which really wasn't the most efficient way to go about adding infrastructure because they needed that infrastructure now or soon, but then they knew within 2 years they needed additional infrastructure at the site. The funding only covered the immediate infrastructure. What would have been sort of more financially efficient would be to, at least plan for the build out of that infrastructure beyond just what the near term needs were. So sometimes you are just constrained by the funding and the terms of the funding, and that's sort of an unfortunate thing. I would say, though, for this particular school district that I just used as a recent example, the second round of infrastructure funding did actually account for not just what was immediate needs, but looking at 5 years. So having data like what we can provide, where we actually look at anything from 5% electrification of your fleet all the way to what if our fleet was fully 100% electric, and we allow folks to dial that in 5% increments. So you could look at your 5%, your 10%, your 20% plan. I mean, I think the best defense is having that data, or maybe offense because you're being proactive about it. It's having that data to say, yes, this meets our immediate need for these 2 buses, but we have another 2 on order. We're planning another 2 after that. So how do we get in front of how long it might take for these upgrades? Some of those conversations, Kevin, started before we had a relationship with Denver Public Schools, so I can't speak directly to that. I know that they have been open about sharing their experiences. So if you would like me to make an introduction to the facilities or energy engineer, Jacob, who was mentioned in our deck, I'm sure he would be happy to have a conversation with you and can provide you with greater insight.
Awesome. Thank you. I feel like it is such a community exercise making this all work. And it's wonderful when there are people who are, amongst the various stakeholders who are willing to have these conversations. And so thank you for putting your email address there in the chat. I know that David and Mary would both be happy to field questions from anybody who is interested in asking them. And same goes for myself and Michelle as well. If we don't know the answer today, right off the top of our heads, we'll find the answer from a member of our amazing community. So with that, I would say that it's probably time to wrap up. Thank you to David and Mary, and thank you also for everyone who spent the hour with us. We will get this up on our website in our library of past presentations, and then we also will post it on our YouTube channel, which is new but growing. And so you can refer back to the presentation anytime. And then if you're interested in seeing a copy of the deck, then reach out to myself or Mary or David, and we can get you to the right place. Thank you all so much, and I hope to see you all on a future webinar.